Case 1. Sonor Greville Clarke. It began with ordinary nights in the barracks at Fort Cavazos, Texas. The soft hum of overhead lights, the distant footsteps of sentries, and the quiet assurances of young soldiers forging bonds far from home. But in the darkness of early spring 2021, that semblance of safety would shatter. Sonor Greville Clarke was no stranger to military discipline. Yet behind the uniform and commendations lay a predator. His first strike was chilling in its simplicity. Entering a female soldier's room through a window while she slept, brandishing a knife, and delivering a pre-typed threat. "You're being robbed. Don't make a sound." He bound her wrists and fled when a FaceTime call disrupted his script. That night planted a seed of terror. Over the following months, Clarke honed his methods. He concealed his identity behind masks, gloves, and sunglasses. In one case, he slipped into a barracks room quietly enough to hold a soldier at gunpoint for hours, raping her, taking disturbing photos of naked vulnerability, and even stealing from her. Each assault was an escalation. Not random, but calculated and cold. By July 2022, Clarke had crossed a grisly threshold. In the dead hours of the night, he forced his way past the threshold of another room, pistol tucked in his pants, ordered a female soldier inside, bound her, undressed her, and, with a lamp cord, strangled her until he believed she was dead. She lay unconscious, 2 seizures later, unconscious for more than a day. The horror of it would leave lasting scars. October 2022 began with more terror. Clarke lurked in a woman's bathroom while she showered, then held her hostage in her barracks room for nearly 3 hours. Blinded, bound, raped, even compelled under duress to prepare for a forced exit in a plastic bin. She escaped naked and terrified, screaming for help as he dropped his phone during the chase. The investigation and court-martial that followed revealed the depths of Clarke's spree. 29 separate charges, including rape, kidnapping, attempted premeditated murder, aggravated assault, indecent recordings, robbery, burglary, and obstruction of justice. In April 2025, a military judge delivered a verdict that matched the gravity of his crimes. Life in prison, plus 112.5 years, reduction to the lowest rank, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and a dishonorable discharge. Today, Clarke is confined within the walls of the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth. His victims, 5 brave survivors, have spoken in open court, their testimonies echoing with pain and strength. They spoke of enduring panic attacks, clinging to pepper spray, cleaning obsessively to fend off trauma. In their voices, the weight of what they lived through. Case 2. Jonathan K Lee. As the clock ticked toward midnight on January 14, 2024, Pvt Jonathan K Lee stood at the precipice of everything he'd built. His career, his pride, his future in the U.S. Army. A signal intelligence analyst stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Lee wasn't just preparing for duty. He was preparing to disappear, facing overwhelming accusations of raping and sexually abusing his own stepdaughters. Horrifying crimes that soldiers are bound to confront in court. The pressure reached its breaking point. Instead of facing justice, he chose flight, unknowingly setting in motion a string of events that would end in murder. Lee's escape from accountability was abrupt and desperate. He fled in his SUV early that Sunday morning, under strict orders to report to his court-martial. His mind was a storm of fear and shame, torn between survival and surrender. Somewhere along the road, his vehicle faltered. He found himself stranded with nowhere to go, spiraling toward the unknown. Then he flagged down a cab. He claimed he wanted to get to a bus stop, but some spark, rage, panic, guilt, ignited inside him. Nicholas Hokema, a 34-year-old cab driver, pulled into the desolate South Center Mall parking lot in Tukwila, unaware he was ferrying a broken man. Witnesses say Lee's eyes shifted to malice when a dispute over the fare erupted. In that moment, fear answered with violence. Lee stabbed Hokema repeatedly, his confession chillingly blunt. "There was a lot of blood. I didn't think he would live." Hokema fell silent under the floodlights of a silent lot. Lee left the taxi idling, its doors open to the cold January air, and vanished. Authorities discovered Hokema's body the next morning, punctuating the end of one man's simple life. A manhunt followed. Lee was found days later in Redmond, not far from where he had fled, arrested by Army CID and local police. By April 23, 2025, Lee's flight ended. At his court-martial at JBLM, he pleaded guilty to murder, desertion, resisting arrest, and violating orders. Already condemned to 64 years for child sexual assault, Lee was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2045, dishonorably discharged, stripped of rank, and thrust into confinement at the disciplinary barracks in Fort Leavenworth. Case 3. Edward Kelly. From decorated Marine to domestic terrorist, Edward Kelly's descent is a chilling tale of rage, delusion, and unbridled intent. 8 years of service in Iraq and Afghanistan sharpened his resolve, and by January 6, 2021, Kelly was among the first waves breaching the U.S. Capitol, wielding a plank of wood with which he helped topple an officer and smash a window to force entry. At that moment, he was a man emboldened by a cause, convinced he was defending a nation spiraling into corruption. But the Capitol doors were only the beginning. As federal agents closed in, Kelly saw himself not as a criminal, but as a soldier, pinned under unjust siege. His arrest in May 2022 ignited something deeper. Not remorse, but vengeance. In encrypted chats, he and accomplice Austin Carter began plotting a campaign of terror. They built car bombs and weaponized drones aimed at the FBI field office in Knoxville, Tennessee. A glaring escalation from protest to precision assassination. Evidence presented at trial revealed a chilling kill list of at least 36 law enforcement names, including their titles and personal info. Prosecutors played a recording in court. "You don't have time to train or coordinate, but every hit has to hurt," Kelly barked. "Start it, attack, take out their office." Every barb of his voice echoed conviction. A man consumed by righteous rage, believing he stood on the edge of a civil war. In November 2024, the jury took barely an hour to convict Kelly on conspiracy to murder federal employees, solicitation to commit violence, and influencing a federal official by threat. But then came the shock. In January 2025, President Trump's sweeping pardons for January 6 defendants wiped away Kelly's capital convictions. To his allies, it seemed justice prevailed. Yet the Tennessee conspiracy stood apart as a grotesque, unmistakable revelation of premeditated violence. On July 2, 2025, U.S. District Judge Thomas Varlan delivered the ultimate sentence: life in prison. He refused to extend the pardon's reach. Prosecutors reinforced their stance. Kelly was remorseless and unfit for rehabilitation. His mission, they said, was not repentance, but war. Case 4. Ryan G. Anderson. Every soldier's darkest fears can start not with combat, but with the betrayal of everything they believe in. Such was the case of Specialist Ryan G. Anderson, a tank crewman and National Guardsman whose story would shock the military and the nation. His journey began like many veterans: recruitment, training, deployment on the horizon. But deep within him, a secret was fermenting that would twist loyalty and duty into treacherous betrayal. In 1999, Anderson converted to Islam, adopting the name Amir Abdul Rashid. While outwardly preparing for deployment to Iraq with the 81st Armored Brigade, he was quietly weaving a web of betrayal online. Posing in Islamist chat rooms, Anderson declared his desire to defect and assist al-Qaeda. He didn't just fantasize. Surveillance footage would later record him outlining how to destroy U.S. tanks and kill his own fellow soldiers. Undercover agents, masquerading as extremist operatives, engaged him. Anderson shared sensitive information about troop movements, tactics, and vulnerabilities. He handed over maps, floppy disks of classified schematics, even spoken instructions on how to disable armored vehicles. It played out like a spy thriller. Hand tremors, coded exchanges, hidden cameras. But this was real, and the stakes were terrifyingly high. When Anderson was arrested in February 2004, the revelation stunned his unit. A tank crewman turned would-be traitor. During his court-martial that September, a panel of 9 commissioned officers watched as video evidence captured his chilling resolve. In closing arguments, prosecutors urged the jury to see behind his calm guise. See Amir Abdul Rashid for what he is: a traitor, they declared. Psychologists testified that Anderson suffered from bipolar disorder and Asperger's syndrome. His defense argued these conditions clouded his intent, making him a man out of touch with reality. But the video footage, his own words explaining how to destroy American lives, and the digital footprint he'd left online told a chillingly different story. On September 3, 2004, Anderson was convicted on 5 counts of attempting to aid the enemy. He received a life sentence with parole eligibility and a dishonorable discharge, his name etched forever into the darkest pages of military history. Now serving his term at the U.S. Disciplinary Barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Anderson's case stands as chilling proof that sometimes the greatest threats come from within. A soldier sworn to protect his country, who once bore the weight of comrades on armored steel, instead plotted their downfall. Case 5. John E. Hatley Specialist to Suspect. The journey of John E. Hatley is one that spirals from trusted leader to convicted war criminal, and its psychological twists are as disturbing as the acts themselves. Hatley was no ordinary soldier. By March 2007, this formidable Texan, a first sergeant with more than 15 years of service in elite units like the 101st Airborne, had earned the trust and respect of those under his command. Charismatic, imposing, a natural motivator, he inspired fierce loyalty. Yet beneath that poised exterior lay a man at war internally, haunted by loss and doubt. Deployed in Baghdad's al-Rashid district, he felt the entire conflict crushing him. Evidence was sparse, detainees were released, and insurgents struck again. Frustration metastasized into a resolve driven by righteous anger. In a chilling sequence recounted by soldiers, Hatley selected 4 blindfolded Iraqi detainees, led them to a canal under the cloak of darkness, and executed them with precision. The rationale was perverse: to protect his men, to prevent future attacks. But the cost would be immeasurable. A subordinate, Staff Sergeant Jess Cunningham, witnessed the cold-blooded killings. Wrestling with moral collapse and loyalty to the chain of command, Cunningham remained silent until fear and conscience collided. Eventually, guilt compelled him to report Hatley and others, igniting a chain reaction that would unravel reputations and reverberate far beyond the battlefield. The subsequent court-martial in April 2009 played out like a slow-burning tragedy. Hatley, wearing the uniform of a decorated leader, faced a panel of his peers. The prosecution wove a narrative backed by emotional testimony. Soldiers recalled innocent men, bound and pleading, led to their deaths, and the footage of patrol reports and soldier statements painted a damning portrait. Hatley's defense, his sterling service, his battlefield valor, fell silent in the face of haunting witness accounts. In a verdict underscoring the darkness of betrayal, he was convicted of premeditated murder and conspiracy and sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. As Hatley was escorted away in shackles, the courtroom was thick with grief, regret, and disbelief. His crime was not committed under the fog of war, but born of clarity, the conscious decision to kill. The soldier who once inspired fierce loyalty within Alpha Company had betrayed the unbreakable bond between comrades, crossing the line from protector to executioner. Years later, parole in October 2020 marked a controversial end to a dark chapter. But the legacy remains, the haunting reminder that war can twist even the most resolved judge, and that within ranks built on trust, the truest violence is the one chosen, not ordered. Case 6. Derek Miller, specialist turned prisoner. Derek Miller's story begins not in a courtroom, but in the dusty heat of Afghanistan's Lagman province on September 26, 2010. A seasoned Maryland National Guard sergeant on his 3rd combat tour, Miller was well aware of the silent threats that lurked within civilian disguises. Intelligence warned of infiltrators using the guise of electricians and plumbers to scope out U.S. positions. That day, suspicion took flesh in the form of Atta Muhammad, a middle-aged Afghan man who sought permission to enter the camp. During interrogation, amid pulled weapons, shifting stories about his purpose, and the car keys he carried, Miller pressed harder. The tension escalated until Muhammad lunged, grabbing for Miller's pistol. With adrenaline and fear surging, Miller fired a single shot to the head. Minutes later, an insurgent attack rained down on the base, proof, he believed, of the dead man's lethal intent. But on U.S. soil, interpretations differ. The military court viewed the killing as premeditated murder. Testimony from the Afghan interpreter, who had subsequently secured asylum in the U.S., and a fellow soldier disavowed Miller's struggle narrative. The jury of 10 deliberated for less than 3 hours before delivering a life sentence. What unfolded next felt almost surreal. Miller's parents watched in agony as their son, once a decorated soldier, was shackled and escorted to Fort Leavenworth's walls, his life sentence hanging like a guillotine. His mother later described clutching a leather-bound Bible, its cover worn from her grip, praying day and night for his release. The courtroom drama that followed became a national flashpoint. Conservative congressmen like Louis Gohmert and Brian Babin, alongside advocates from both sides of the aisle, argued the killing was a battlefield necessity, not a war crime. A nonprofit, United American Patriots, mounted a fierce campaign, challenging the prosecution's narrative of no forensic evidence, disputed testimony, and questionable witness credibility. In April 2018, after nearly 7 torturous years inside, a clemency board reduced his sentence to 20 years. A few months later, a parole board granted his release. On May 20, 2019, the gates opened and Miller walked out, freed yet forever changed. Today he works on Capitol Hill, advising lawmakers on military justice reforms and advocating for others like him. Derek Miller's saga is a raw portrait of war's moral bullet, where split-second choices collide with written law, and one shot can redefine a life. Case 7. Robert Bales. In the quiet hours before dawn on March 11, 2012, Staff Sergeant Robert Bales slipped out of Camp Balambi wearing traditional Afghan clothing and night vision goggles. He was expected back, a routine night guard duty, but instead, he embarked on a horror that would forever scar 2 Afghan villages and redefine what one man could do in extreme isolation. Bales moved like a phantom through the darkness, slipping into homes first in Al-Qazai and then Najiban, firing into sleeping families. When the gunfire stopped, an unimaginable toll lay behind him. 16 dead, including 9 children, and 6 more left wounded and traumatized. Some bodies were burned, some victims were stabbed. It was a massacre born of chilling intent, not accident. He returned to base in between attacks. Surveillance cameras captured a hooded figure, rifle in hand, walking back. No alarms sounded. He returned a second time before walking into a guard tower, weaponless, shirt off, and boasted, "I did it." His surrender was as clinically composed as the slaughter he'd just executed. It was impossible to believe he could commit such carnage alone, yet the Army, and later Bales himself, confirmed he acted solo. Behind that surrender lay layers of shattered trauma. Bales had served 4 combat tours, suffered head injuries and PTSD, dealt with the death of comrades, marital stress, financial strain, and perhaps most disturbingly, isolation. Over 90 sleepless hours he fixated on a log stump damaged in IED fire, and in a bizarre act of misplaced purpose, chopped it to ribbons. It was a symbolic purge, a precursor to the brutality that followed. Military investigators revealed a pattern of erratic behavior, a punch to an Afghan truck driver just weeks earlier, steroid use, heavy drinking, and no formal intervention despite warning signs. The base's leadership claimed they knew nothing, a failure of oversight with catastrophic consequences. As villagers cried for justice, protests flared across Afghanistan, and international outrage smoldered. In June 2013, Bales accepted a plea bargain, telling the court his actions were an act of cowardice. He avoided the death penalty but received a life sentence without parole, stripped of rank, pay, and honor. Appeals followed, challenging withheld evidence, the effects of anti-malarial drugs, and mounting calls for clemency. But all were rejected. Now serving his sentence at Fort Leavenworth, Bales remains a specter of wartime extremity. His case forces us to confront unthinkable questions: how trauma becomes unchecked rage, how a man pledged to protect can descend into calculated brutality, and how a war's harshest wounds sometimes come not from enemy fire, but from within. Case 8. Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs. In the eerie silence of Afghanistan's Maiwan district, Staff Sergeant Calvin Gibbs emerged from the chaos of combat transformed, and so did the bounds of atrocity. A charismatic leader with a follow-me persona, Gibbs commanded more than respect. He cultivated devotion. But beneath that veneer lay a darker mission, murdering innocent civilians for sport and bragging about it at camp. Between January and May 2010, Gibbs and his secret kill team lurked in the dead of night, stalking villagers they labeled savages. Their first kill came with a grenade tossed at a farmer, a child among the victims, executed by a subordinate. Gibbs captured the moment, parading the man's corpse for cameras and later slicing off fingers as trophies, macabre war spoils akin to antlers from a trophy hunt. Psychologists would find it hard to decode the thrill Gibbs sought in death. He boasted of murdering sleeping Muslims, planting weapons near corpses to justify the killings, and laughing with fellow soldiers over grotesque photos. Prosecutors described the leader's ambitions: murder, depravity, planned and carried out under the banner of war. He held his victims' fingers like spoils and declared, "These people are all savages." It was a descent into barbarism few could imagine shadowing a battlefield. As whispers circulated among conscience-stricken soldiers, one brave soul, Adam Winfield, felt terror at challenging Gibbs. He told his father, Gibbs was the golden boy, and nobody dared speak up. But the horror couldn't stay buried. When whispers grew into investigations, sparked by a whistleblower, Camp Ramrod cracked open to expose the chilling human trophy collection and staged battlefield murders. At the court-martial in November 2011, cameras flashed as Gibbs's kill team were dragged into the harsh light of justice. 11 soldiers faced charges. Gibbs stood trial for 3 premeditated murders and a string of war crimes. The prosecution painted a portrait of evil: trophy collecting, staged scenes, and calculated betrayal under the camouflage of duty. Convicted on all counts, Gibbs was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. The verdict condemned not just his bone-chilling brutality, but the collapse of moral authority in war's shadows. His final disgrace, stripped of rank, benefits, and any honor he once wore. Case 9. It was just before dawn on March 12, 2006, when Private First Class Stephen Dale Green slipped out of his army barracks near Yusufia, Iraq. Clad in black long underwear and carrying an AK-47, he approached the Qasim family home. Parents Qasim and Fakriya, their 6-year-old daughter Hadil, and 14-year-old Abir, setting a stage for unspeakable horror. That morning, Green and 3 fellow soldiers, Barker, Cortez, and Spielman, were seen at their checkpoint playing cards, drinking, and casually discussing a plan to kill some Iraqis and rape Abir. The casual cruelty in their laughter would soon turn into nightmarish reality. Without uniform or hesitation, they infiltrated the house. In one room, Abir's parents and little sister were executed. In another, Cortez and Barker raped Abir. Green burst in, declared, "I just killed them all," raped her, shot her in the head multiple times, and doused her lower body with gasoline before setting it alight. The flames and smell of charred flesh alerted neighbors, who broke down the door to discover a scene so grotesque it would shake a nation. The atrocity was initially blamed on insurgents, but a guilt-ridden soldier, PFC Justin Watt, came forward 2 months later, peeling back layers of lies to expose the truth behind the rage and betrayal. Green, discharged months before for antisocial personality disorder, was arrested under the Military Extraterritorial Jurisdiction Act and brought to trial in Kentucky. In May 2009, the jury convicted him of rape and multiple murders. Though prosecutors pushed for the death penalty, the jury could not unanimously agree. Green received life without parole, a sentence some said was too lenient for a crime so merciless. Locked away in U.S. custody, Green admitted he didn't think of Iraqis as humans, revealing a chilling emptiness within. 5 years later, in February 2014, he died by suicide in his Tucson prison cell, ending a life consumed by violence and devoid of accountability. Today, the Mahmoudiya massacre remains one of the darkest chapters in military history, a story of soldiers turned predators, moral collapse in wartime, and the haunting cost of dehumanization. The question lingers: how could someone sworn to defend become capable of such monstrosity? Case 10. It began as a desperate journey for relief, but ended in horror that haunted the U.S. Army for years. Pvt John M. Russell, a 48-year-old veteran from Texas on his third deployment to Iraq, sought help at the Camp Liberty Combat Stress Clinic in May 2009. His nights were sleepless, his mind burdened by depression and psychotic features. Colleagues talked of a man unraveling, unstable, distant, even suicidal. He was unarmed when he arrived seeking treatment. But less than a day later, something snapped. On May 11, 2009, after a sharp confrontation with medical staff, Russell seized an unsecured M16, stole a vehicle, and drove back to the clinic. Around 1:41 p.m., he stormed inside with chilling precision, opening fire on 5 unarmed personnel, the very soldiers who had tried to help him. They included Major Matthew Hausiel, Navy Commander Charles Springle, and 3 younger soldiers, Specialist Jacob Barton, Sergeant Christian Bueno Galgaldos, and Private First Class Michael Yates. Witnesses later recounted the deadly calculated chaos. Russell removed his ID tags, loaded high-capacity magazines, and treated the clinic like a battlefield. Even after killing some of the victims, he shot again to ensure none survived. When military police arrived, they found him calm, almost cold, standing among the bodies. In the months that followed, Russell's defense tried to paint a picture of mental collapse. His attorneys alleged the stress of multiple tours, constant suicidal thoughts, and mismanagement at the stress clinic pushed him over a precipice. But prosecutors argued he had planned the carnage. Security footage, ballistics, and the weaponized SUV pointed to premeditation. A military judge agreed. In May 2013, after Russell pleaded guilty to unpremeditated murder to avoid the death penalty, the court still ruled the act was premeditated. He received life without parole, stripped of rank, benefits, and any future in uniform. Today, Russell sits in Fort Leavenworth, a grim emblem not just of one man's dissent, but of systemic failures. How untreated trauma, unchecked desperation, and institutional blind spots can collide with tragic and fatal consequences. His story forces a haunting question. When the battle for a soldier's mind goes unseen, who bears responsibility for the violence that follows? And there you have it, the hidden chronicles of 10 U.S. military men who crossed lines so dark, they were condemned to spend their lives behind bars. From secret kill teams in Afghan villages, to betrayals in the shadows of war zones, to conspiracies brewing right here on American soil, these stories reveal how the uniform that symbolizes honor can sometimes conceal monstrous secrets. Each case is a brutal reminder that the battlefield isn't always overseas. It can rage inside the human mind, twisting duty into devastation. If you are hooked by these chilling tales and want more gripping true crime stories that dive deep into the psychology of killers, conspirators, and the crimes that shock the world, don't forget to smash that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and ring that bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the darkest stories wear the brightest uniforms. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next one.